process has begun. Some things are live, other things are not.
Some things are already live.
Yes, this is the nature of the process.
Okay.
Here we go.
We shall begin. It's good to be back, gentlemen. Thanks for waiting up for me. This is a beautiful mimer, a classic. Maybe you can give David one of the copies. And it's essentially, we've now entered into the 9 days. And so we're in a new Tekufa, heading towards the 9th of Av, which is a very heavy day, especially with the weight of the world on our shoulders. I'm sure everybody's kind of feeling this. But this is showing us sort of the inner light of the 9th of Av by explaining, first and foremost, the inyan of Tu B'Av, which, as the Mishnah states, quote, Lo hayu yomim tovim liYisrael kachamish asar b'Av v'kiyom HaKippurim. There were no days on the whole calendar for the Jewish people like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. It's kind of a strange Mishnah when you put all juxtapose those two things together, putting Yom Kippur in this sentence with the 15th of Av. Most people are not aware of the brilliant glory of this 15th of Av, that it's the greatest day of the year. And as Rebbe points out in many places in Maimarim of this sort, it even says the 15th of Av before Yom Kippur, which is, we're going to see, that implies it's even greater than Yom Kippur. Usually we think about, if we're going to say the greatest day of the year, it actually even says in the Torah, Achas Bashana. There's one day of the year that is the greatest day of the year. In the Chumash itself basically testifies to this, which is Yom Kippur. Here there's a Mishnah that says the 15th of Av is the greatest day, and Yom Kippur, as though Yom Kippur is sort of secondary.
We said this about every day.
Well, days like yours, we say it. I don't know, not everybody has days like yours. Okay, Umevi Admor Merinu Rashab. So the Rebbe Rashab brings, you guys can get rid of the bugs while I was going. Nishmasu Eid B'Maimaru HaMevar Inyan Chamish Asar B'Av. So the Rebbe Rashab brings in a mimer called in a hemshech called Eter. He brings a mimer about the 15th of Av. The Is of a Pri Eitz Chaim, and he says there, quote, it's brought in the Pri Eitz Chaim, which is a Kabbalah Sefer from the Arizal, Shayom Tov Detu Be'av Hu Sha'az Hu Shleimus Milei HaLevana. What is so great about this 15th of Av is that is the day that is the full moon. That's basically what he says is its greatness. It's a full moon. V'inyanim she'iru b'chamish asar ba'av hamanuim b'gemara hem kamo totzas me'inyanu aikari shel yom zeh shleimus milei haLevana. And these things which the Gemara delineates, which is the Gemara's explanation as to why this day is so great, all of them are only really outcomes of its true greatness, which is the fact that the moon is full that day. So we're going to see a little bit about what's such a big deal about the full moon. But before that, in the Gemara, it enumerates several things that happened on this day throughout the generations that make this day, officially, at least according to Nigla, so wondrous. Does anyone know any of these things? What happened on the 15th of Av to our people that made this the greatest day in the whole year? According to the Mishnah, by the way, as Yeshua points out, oftentimes in Chassidus, we do say that each day is the greatest day of the year. And the Rebbe even mentions this in Sichas. In other words, that you're not the only one that's sort of scratching your head about that. And the Rebbe points out, if you remember, I think I even answered this question for you once, that since the Or Ein Sof and the essence of Hashem is everywhere and at all times, then the reality is that every moment is actually the greatest moment that could ever be. You're in the presence of God Almighty and the Or Ein Sof and everything. The fact that we also live in time means that there's a certain gateway in order to see and perceive the Or Ein Sof and tap into it, and the time and the day that you're in, it has all the elements and configuration to unearth the essence of Hashem at that moment. And therefore, when you get to each holiday, that holiday at that time becomes the gateway to experience that. And this is how the Rebbe explains it. Sometimes we say it's Yud Tes Kislev, and then we say it's Hanukkah right after that. What's that? Pesach Sheni, no matter where you go. So however, well, that is a beautiful Hasidic word and answers a lot of questions. We still don't find in the Mishnah, understand, Nigla is coming along and saying that this is the greatest day of the year. So that already requires a different kind of answer. We need to have a Nigla type of answer to understand what actually is behind this. that the Mishnah declares such a thing. So again, does anyone have any idea what historical things took place? I think there's about 7 things mentioned there, and I wouldn't be probably easy to bring them all out by memory. But okay, what was the first one? Not that one, but you were going to get to that. What happened on that day that was considered celebratory?
Maybe the war against the tribe of Binyamin ended on this day, maybe.
Okay, that was one of the things. Yes, that's what Yeshua just mentioned also. Good. The destruction stopped? Not exactly, but the first thing that's mentioned there, we're going to see soon, this is one of the things that everybody's going to focus on, is that Kalu Mese Midbar, right? That the people who were dying in the desert, they stopped dying on this day. What does it mean? That whole generation was decreed to die, right? And they would all sort of be taken out. We're going to see inside, on Tisha B'Av, they would actually bury themselves and get ready to die, because a whole crop of them was going to die every year, and they knew it. And on the 15th of Av, it says, this is actually the first thing that's enumerated as why this is such a great day. What else?
Which year was it?
What's that?
Which generation was it?
This was the generation of Moses.
Oh, the eagle?
No, after 40 years, they were decreed to die in the desert because of the sin of the spies, right? So then that generation had to die off. How did they die off? When did they die off? They all died on one day, seemingly, which was Tisha B'Av, right? And it ended, what's that? They prepared themselves because they didn't want a whole bunch of bodies, I guess, lying around. They all knew that this was going to happen. They sort of figured it out. So they buried themselves, everyone. It's freaky. And then that year, on the 15th of Av, it stopped. That was the first thing enumerated. What else? You mentioned there was a horrible incident with the tribe of Benjamin, which we're not going to get into right now, where they basically did such wicked acts that the rest of the Jewish people disowned them, and they said they're not allowed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. They basically tried to undo their cherem on a whole tribe, right? And on the 15th of Av, they undid it. Another thing we find in the daughters of Tzlafchad, right, that we just had in the previous parsha, if you remember, because they figured out this business that they were going to be able to take inheritance for girls, right? That was one of the laws that we learned from them. Then there was an additional problem that sort of ensued, which was that if they did inherit and they married someone from a different tribe, their tribal land would wind up switching to another tribe, and their father's ancestral plot would have been minimized. So for a little short time there, they didn't allow tribes to intermarry at all, one with the other. If you were Binyamin, you married a Binyaminite, Benjaminite. That was it. You couldn't get out. So when that was considered very difficult, right? Couldn't marry another Jew even from the tribe of Shimon if you wanted to. So that was also ended on the 15th of Av. This is another thing that was enumerated as these celebratory acts, which made this the greatest day of all time. What else is over there? It says that this is the day that it was called the Day of the Broken Axes, which means that on the 15th of Av, they would stop chopping wood for that year's wood offerings to the temple. A wood offering is kind of an interesting thing. Every offering needs wood, and they would actually have certain families that donated wood, which is extraordinarily expensive and was considered to be a very, very honorable offering for many reasons. And that 15th of Av was the last day that the wood was good for that year's crop of wood. Why? Because it couldn't be wormy or wet or moldy. And it says the power of the sun sort of loses its strength on the 15th of Av. So they would all come out and break their axes. And it was a celebratory day. And it was part of this list of things that made it such a holy day. There's more. See there. But anyway, there's a whole list of things that created this Mishnah to come and declare this. However, I just brought out a few of the ideas just to point out what the Rebbe Rashab is trying to bring out here, which is that he says the real celebration of this day has all to do with the fact that it's a full moon. And all these other things are merely an outcome of the fact that it's a full moon. That's the celebration. It's the 15th of Av, is a full moon in the sky. That's what he says. He brings it from the Eitz Chaim, pre-Eitz Chaim. It's not a simple book. And that's the main thing, and the rest of it is sort of extensions of the full moon. 5 lines down, actually I'm not sure if I have the same pagination as you guys do, but he says, Umadayak ba'maimer. I think you got the back end of that mimer there. You're going to turn that around. Here, let's see. Medayek ba'maimer, right there after the brackets. Medayek ba'maimer. Hey, this that on the 15th day the moon stands in its fullness. Kaima stands, sihara, the moon, bashlemusa, in its fullness. Hu b'chol chodesh. I'm sure you brilliant minds were about to say the same thing. This happens every month. every 15th of the month should be the greatest day that ever happened. Afal pikein lo nikvu liyom tov milvad Pesach. Tu b'Nisan, v'Sukkos, tu b'Tishrei. And yet we don't find that holidays were actually made out of this wondrous day, the 15th of the month, except for some big ones. We're not going to totally negate this. We do have Pesach on the 15th of Nisan and Sukkos on the 15th of Tishrei, which are arguably the biggest holidays until you knew about Tu B'Av.
There's sort of like a happy sentence that just happens to be that's a full moon during that. It's not about the actual day.
Well, that's what we thought about Tu B'Av as well, right? It was really because the people stopped dying in the desert. It was because of this, that we were allowed to marry in, and all these things happened. But the Arizal told us those things are actually the happenstance of the real thing, which is the fullness of the moon. We could probably say the same thing about, not probably, the more Chassidus you get involved in, you realize that the full moon is mamash no joke, and it doesn't just happen to pop up. It's actually an interesting thing. How do you say 15? You see, it's called two. Why do you say two? Right? You say Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, because it's Hashem's name, right? So that's not an accident either, right? The full moon represents Hashem. It's like the bat signal in the sky, right? Hashem's shining you His name. You can't even say it, right? So this is actually what the main action is that Hashem's name is shining into the world. The moon represents, etc., etc., and the fullness of the moon is the full revelation of God into the world. And in fact, that's why Tishrei has a holiday on the 15th, and that's why Nisan has a holiday on the 15th. But we don't find that and if you look through the calendar, like in the subtext, you will find that just about almost every month has some special holiday on the 15th, right? Not every single one, but for example, you have Purim, and you have, what else do you have? You have Tu B'Shvat, right? You have... you got a lot of stuff over there. Anyway, l'chaim. But even if you don't have a specific holiday, you can definitely learn from here. The 15th of every month is the revelation of that month in full. And you do think, even if they're not like official holidays, for example, Elul, what's the 15th of Elul? Yeah, you guys should know this one. Nobody? Tesvav Elul? 15th of Elul is the day of the founding of Tomchei Temimei Yeshiva systems.
Oh.
It's probably the greatest day that ever took place on the earth. It's even greater than the greatest day. Okay, fine. So they've had the 15th of the month is not particularly celebrated except for these two times, Pesach and Sukkot. Ubiyoser ain't no move on what's further not understood. Shemipash tu salashin. The simple language of how you read this Mishnah, Lo hayu yomim tovim liYisrael k'chamisha b'av. It says there were no holidays like the 15th of Av, etc. Mashma sheyu yom tov gadol yoser mikola yomim tovim. This is nigla, right? This is the rabbis are saying. How do you read this simple Mishnah? It implies that that this is greater than all the other yomim tovim. I'm telling you, you guys never even heard this until today. It's a greater holiday than Sukkot and Pesach and Yom Kippur. Gam Yom Tov the Pesach for Sukkot, right? And even though Sukkot and Pesach are also on the 15th, but it seems that there's something that happened on the 15th of Av and the full moon of Av is even greater than those 15s because it says there's no Yomim Tovim like it. Av Shagam Yomim Tovim Elu Hem B'tu B'Chodesh, even though they were also on the 15th of the month. V'nekudas Abir Bazeh. Let's get to the point, says the Rebbe. In the Mimer of the Rebbe Rashab, he says the Iker Amayla Demilim V'Shlemus Halavana B'Yom Hatu Hazeh. What is so great about this full moon on this 15th? Shamilu V'Shlemus Hula'achar Chesaron. It's because we're talking about coming to a state of fullness after a great level of absence, right? The idea of the moon is a fluctuator, right? Unlike the sun that stays steady all the time, right? and it basically never changes. The moon is going through a constant state of cycle and revolution, ups and downs. So the whole concept of the full moon is juxtaposed against this sort of the new moon, where you don't even see any moon. This is like the Jewish people, of course, who are compared to the moon, that we sometimes, fall and you can't see us and there's no revelation, and suddenly, boom, in a couple weeks, we come to a full fruition. So the whole idea of the moon and the greatness of the full moon is in juxtaposition of its being small and empty. So the rebound, so to speak, of the full moon of Av is the greatest rebound. Why? Because there's a greater achrei chesaron, after the lack, hashleimus nailiyos or hashleimus shemitzad atzma. When you have lack of something and then you bring it back to its fullness, the fullness is greater than if you had no lack at all. That's the basic principle. Kiyudua, as it's known, haklal ba'aliyos v'yuridos. There's a principle when it comes to going up, your ups and downs. I'm sure you could all relate to this in your own lives. The aliyah shla'achri ha'yerida, hi aliyah l'mayla yosem ha'darga shlifnei ha'yerida. That when you go up after you've gone down, the up that you find yourself is higher than you were standing before you went down. Right? In other words, when you rebound and come back, you go higher than where you started. As in fact, I don't know if you guys remember, we learned a couple of Maimarim on this very concept of going before the beginning, right? Sof ma'asav b'machshava techila, sam nafsheinu b'chaim. Just reminding you that I used to work here, and it says that the idea is you go down, you can go even higher than where you started. So let's read the line again. The aliyah that comes after the yerida, that comes after the descent, is an aliyah which is above the place that you started before the yerida. Right? So you go higher and higher. The kol shayirida hi biyoser, and additionally, the lower you fall, haliyah hu biyoser, the higher you will strive to be, and the higher you reach. Right? So the idea is that our descent is a symbol of how great our ascent is. And therefore, we can now, this is what the Rebbe Rashab answers to why this 15th of the month is greater than all others. Because the Ikar Amayla Demilu Halavanu Betuva'av, because the whole concept of the moon being full, which again represents the idea of making a comeback and restoring wholeness to a place of brokenness, there is no month which is more broken than Av, and therefore the restoration of the wholeness is reaching the greatest heights, and therefore the 15th of this month is greater than all other 15ths, even though they all have some type of a yerida and an aliyah, because that's the Indian of a month. Right? How do you say month in Hebrew? A chodesh, which is like a chiddush, which means you didn't have something and suddenly you do. So there's all the concept of this rebound is the notion of every month, but none is greater than the month of Av. Ki b'chodesh Av, in the month of Av, hayirida de lavana, the fall of the moon. Where does the moon fall? Because the Yisrael are called the moon. We are called domin the lavana. Right? We have our greatest fall throughout history in this month. It's the greatest descent. Therefore, the ascent of Tu B'Av, the 15th specifically, representing the rebound, which follows the fall of Tisha B'Av, is the greatest aliyah out there. Simple. You got it? Okay. Okay, let's go on to Os Beis. Any questions? V'yesh lomar the inyan hanal shat yom tov de tu b'av hu lefi sha'az hi aliyah shel achrei yerida de tisha b'av. This that we just got through saying, that the holiday of Tu B'Av is because it represents the elevation after the descent of Tisha B'Av. Merumaz gam b'zeh sha'inyan harishon she'ira b'Tu B'Av. This is hinted to, the idea of the high rebound from the great fall is hinted to in the first thing that the Gemara enumerates of the special holiday events that took place on this day. Does anyone remember I told you the first one was? They stopped dying. Kalu bo meisei midbar, right? That all the people in the desert stopped dying.
When they stopped dying in Tisha B'Av, they went down and they realized they got back up in the last day of Tisha B'Av?
So, it's true what you're saying. However, why do we say that it wasn't the 15th of Av? Because what happened was, they all got up, and they didn't believe that they stopped dying. What they thought instead was they miscalculated the moon. They said, oh, we messed up the day. It must not be the 9th of Av. Maybe it's the 8th of Av or something, right? So they went down and they did it again. And they all buried themselves the next night. And they got up. And they said, you know what, this is not, because they had been trained on this, right? Imagine, it was as dependable as the sunrise. You know, they knew they were going to die that day. So then, when the moon, they did it over and over again until the 15th of the month. When they got to the 15th of the month, there was no denying that it ended because the moon was full. They couldn't, you can't miscalculate the 9th looking and a full moon. So that's where they celebrated it. But what you're saying is very profound, actually, and the Rebbe is going to bring that whole thing out in this mimer. Yeah.
Why couldn't they have said that on the 14th when it's so close to the full moon that it's obvious it's not the 9th? Or the 13th almost.
It's I guess it's still debatable. It's not full. Maybe we made a mistake. That's what it says. I can't calculate. I think they were. It's like, you know what it says. You can take the Jew out of Gullus, but you can't take the Gullus out of a Jew. Chas v'shalom. In other words, they didn't believe, right? Why don't we just go and knock out Iran and all of their proxies and just take over the situation? The land is ours. God is with us. Could it be more obvious? Because we're used to being beaten on and defending ourselves and not being sure-footed, and so we just kind of go along with the program, right? Soon, B'ezrat Hashem, the moon will be full. There'll be undeniable reality, and we'll do what we have to do. But it's kind of like ingrained, this disbelief, you know, that you're going to die. Chas v'chalila. What's that? It's the Gemara, yeah. The Mishnah says the greatest day. The Gemara then tries to explain why. I forgot to tell you the best one. It actually says this as part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah explains what was so great is that the girls would go out and dance in the fields, and the boys would come and pick their shidduch. Just like it was a day of. That's why they call it kind of like a day of like love in Eretz Yisrael. It's the idea of, you know, when all the shidduchim were made. If you'll notice, that a lot of these things have to do with marriage, right? They were allowed to marry each other's tribes. They were allowed to marry, again, the tribe of Binyamin. They would all get married on this day. The girls would go out and say, choose me. It was like some kind of a situation over there.
It's the day when the woman were ovulating?
All right. It doesn't say that in the Gemara there. Okay. I don't think they actually. I think they just got engaged, man, at that time. Yeah, I'm going to see there. Okay. So in any case, we want to now connect this idea of the great rebound of the month of Av with the full moon to the first thing that happened that's enumerated there, which is the Kalu Bo Meisei Midbar, when the people stopped dying in the desert. The Inyan Meisei Midbar Kashrem Tisha B'Av. We know that the death in the desert was connected with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av nigzar al Dura Midbar, she'emusu b'Midbar v'lo yikansу la'aretz. It was unfortunately, sadly, that it was on the 9th of Av itself that the Jewish people were decreed they would not enter the land. They were all going to die in the desert and not enter the land. Right? When did that decree happen?
4 years ago.
When the spies came back, they gave a bad report. The whole nation went into hysterical tears, and Hashem said, "Oh, you want to cry about it? You're going to cry for all generations on this day." And He decreed at that time, the day that they got back, He decreed, "You're not going. This whole generation is not going into the land." So the 9th of Av was already a horrible day from that moment on, that the Jews of the desert were not granted entry into the land. But then, if that wasn't bad enough, as I just explained to you, the fulfillment of that decree was also on Tisha B'Av. Not only are you going to not go into the land because of Tisha B'Av, you're all going to die in this desert on Tisha B'Av. Every single person there, your side is Tisha B'Av. It's like the your side of all of Am Yisrael from that generation. It's crazy. Shebekol Tisha B'Av, that every Tisha B'Av of Lamed Tesh Shanim Achronim Shei B'Bimra of 39 years, right? Besides that first year when this whole went down, 39 years. Hayu Osim Kivreihem, the Gemara itself, right? Rashi explains in the Gemara of Tainus, right, that they buried themselves. They all dug their own graves. Can you imagine the horror? Vayom Tov the Tu B'Av Shebo Kalu Beisim Midbar, and the Yom Tov of of the 15th of Av, in which this stopped happening, hu aliyah la'achar yud Tisha B'Av. It's again, you have this idea of the rebound, the aliyah that comes after such a horrible and grotesque descent. ומזה מובן גם בנוגע לעיקר הירידה דתשע באב שבו חרב הבית בראשונה ושנייה. And based on that, we can now understand what is commonly known to be the tragedy of Tisha B'Av, which is, what's that? The destruction of the temple. Both temples. Crazy, right? So in other words, both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. So from here we can understand regarding the main descent of Tisha B'Av, in which both temples were destroyed, ובפרט שגם גזירת החורבן הייתה באותו יום, and also the decree of the destruction was on that day. Tisha B'Av d'shana rishona shaya b'midbar. In other words, even when they were decreed not to go into the land, and Hashem said, you're going to cry every year on this day, He didn't mean you're going to cry every year on all the generations. I take it back. He said you're going to cry on all the generations on this day. What was He really saying? Not only you're not going to go into the land, you people of the desert, but this is going to be the day of crying. Your temples are going to be destroyed on this day. So that decree of the destruction of the temples also happened right off the bat when the spies came back. Yeah.
Will the decree be annulled when Messianic times? Will it still be a day of crying?
Yes, it's going to be a day of crying of joy. That's what it's. That's not going to be a no. That doesn't really a no. In a day of intense, joyful tears, transformation of tears, tears of tshuva and tears of simcha. As Yoshua mentioned, Gush Kativ happened on Tisha B'Av. We did that to ourselves. Gush Kativ is when we went into Gaza, when we had a settlement in Gaza, a beautiful Jewish settlement with greenhouses and beachfront properties and happy Jews and synagogues, and everybody was just great over there in Gaza, right? Because we had a piece of it that we conquered. We decided, out of our own free will, that it would be in the best interest of the world peace that we should just hand them the keys to this place, forcibly remove our own citizens from there, tearing children literally out of their homes, knocking down our own synagogues with military strength and might. It happened in my lifetime. I went there to try to protest amongst many, many other thousands and hundreds of thousands of Jews, and we saw a horrific sight. You can watch it. Unfortunately, you guys don't even know what I'm talking about. It's a crazy situation, but we have to continue to tell the story because we're right now living the aftermath of this horrible, horrible decision. Hopefully we won't make any more decisions like this. And we decided, you know what? Let these people live, these beautiful Palestinians. They want to be our friends. They just don't have enough beachfront property. And so we literally, army, you find certain soldiers, mamish, lost their minds. Because some of the soldiers were even religious. They tried to put those religious soldiers like not on this mission. But they sent mamash an army to tear Jews out of their own homes and put them in trucks and ship them out of there. And then what happened? They turned it into mamash tunnel city and firing rockets at us. It was the worst probably decision since the spies came home over here. And again, when did we decide to carry out this mission? On Tisha B'Av. We don't have a Torah. We didn't know this. Can you believe this insanity? We went in there on Tisha B'Av and did this to ourselves. It makes me sick. I can't even go on with this. Okay. Hashem help us. L'chaim.
20 years ago?
2005. It's yesterday. This is the aftermath. This is exactly the result of that. So, don't blame Iran.
We controlled the whole Gaza?
We did it to ourselves. Yeah. No, we controlled a piece of it. Gush Katif. Okay. Exactly as the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, don't give away an inch of land. Giving away land is dangerous and causes loss of life, God forbid, of the Jewish people. Not peace. Okay, in any case, we have also on that fateful day, when the spies came home, a decree on the first and second temples. That's what it means, that they would be crying for the generations. Ubifrat, in the brackets here, Shagam Gezeres Achorban Haisabos Yom. Not only were the temples destroyed, but even the decree of the temples being destroyed was on that day. The Tisha B'Av of the Shana Rishona Shaiva Midbar of that year, the first year they were in the Midbar. Shabo Nigzar Al Dur HaMidbar Shalo Yikansu La'aretz. That same day, where they were decreed not to go into the land, right? They were also decreed the temples would be destroyed. And both decrees were for the same sin, which is crazy how grievous of a sin this was. Cheta Meragli, right? They came back and they gave an evil report about the land. We don't want to go into the land. So one of my explanations of life is, what is the Meraglim? It's basically the first shluchim of Moshe Rabbeinu. And our generation, right, is the generation where the Rebbe, I believe, was trying to rectify this, right? That he made every single one of us into a shliach, into a spy, to go and conquer the land. This is the great tikkun of all of humanity and all of creation, the sin of the spies needs to be rectified. What is the sin of the spies? A failure in shlichus, right? And so the Rebbe created a whole generation where he stopped calling us Bnei Yisrael, he stopped calling us Chassidim, he stopped calling us Talmidim, he called his generation Shluchim, every single last one of them. He gave us the job to finish. Someone had a hand up?
Why did the whole generation get affected by like 12 rabbis? Why the whole generation sin and all of it?
Well, first of all, when they came back, they scared the Jewish people into a national frenzy, where they said, basically, we don't want to go. They believed the spies. So it wasn't just that the spies were the problem, but the Jews, they had an alternative. Kalev and Yeshua told them it was good, but the people were swept away by the pandemonium of the day, right? They believed it, and therefore they ran, and they didn't listen to Hashem. So it was a national sin. Everyone was responsible.
So it wasn't the spies that messed up, it was the people's response to the information the spies gave them?
Look, the spies messed them up. They were killed in a horrible plague where their tongues dripped down to their stomachs and
Why did they lie?
Something crazy.
Or
They didn't. I kind of took us into this conversation, so I can't blame you for asking questions on it. But in other words, in terms of just the process of this mimer. But in short, the way the Rebbe explains it is that, yeah, because seemingly, what did they do wrong? They were asked to go give a report, and they gave one. But they weren't asked to give their opinion about whether they could go or not. They were asked to tell me what's there.
supposed to be journalists.
And when you come, yeah, exactly, supposed to be journalists. Exactly. Yeah. Don't stand up in your soapbox and decide what the right part of the news is, right? Exactly. So they invented CNN and Fox, for that matter. Okay, all of them. So Shabatu B'Av Meir Me'ein Hagila de La'asid. So what happens here now? So what we're saying is, we now see, just like in general, Av and the full moon rectifies, is a rebound for the great descent of Av, so too, regarding all the things that happened on Av, the destruction and so forth, what's the rebound in Jewish history of this horrible destruction? On Tu B'Av, Meir Gilu HaGilu Da'asi Lava. It's an amazing situation. Now you can understand why Tu B'Av is the greatest holiday. Because what's the rectification of not going to the land and the destruction of one temple and the next temple and the decree that the temple will be destroyed is the third base of Mikdash and like ultimate harmony and peace on earth. So on Tu B'Av, it's the rebound of the fall. So on Tu B'Av, there's a shine of the messianic light which rectifies all the fall of humanity. That's what the Mishnah is not joking around. This is the greatest day, even greater than Yom Kippur. There can't be a greater day than this because it represents the rebound of everything that went wrong and the ultimate completion and rectification of the destruction of the temple, which is nothing other than the third base of Mikdash and Mashiach.
But Mashiach, I heard it came down on Tisha B'Av, not Tu B'Av.
You just asked the same question twice. I love it. You're onto something there, right? In other words, what's the story? I thought they stopped dying on Tisha B'Av, not Tu B'Av. I thought Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, not Tu B'Av. But no, we're going to get to this. This is a very interesting point that you're making. But the point really that we're making here is that the full moon represents the full revelation of that which was lacking earlier, and therefore it's specifically the 15th of the month which brings this ultimate rebound and divine rectification. But I'm intentionally ignoring you because you're jumping the gun. Shikarahu binyan beis hamikdash hashlishi. The main thing is the third temple, which, in other words, that's what the 15th represents, the rectification. Aliyah shla'achrei yuridu churban bayis rishon v'sheni, which is the elevation after the first and second destruction. Fine, you ready to go on? Chapter 3. Mamshich ba'maimer. He continues in the Maimer. Who's continuing in what Maimer? It's good to kind of keep the Rebbe Rashab. Thank you. The Rebbe is chazering over a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab. And
This is Rabbi Shalom Pasternak.
no, this is all the Rebbe, but he's basically keeps quoting pieces of the Rebbe Rashab's mimer and explaining them. And here too, he continues in his mimer, the Rebbe Rashab. Bir HaSheiches the Tu B'Av the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. What's the connection of Tu B'Av now to the third Beis HaMikdash? Because we just mentioned that it's basically the revelation of that. This is a very cool point. He says in the future, the Vav K will turn into a Yud K. And this is somehow a connection of the 15th of Av with the final Beis HaMikdash. What does it mean in the future the Vav K will turn into a Yud K? First of all, you understand it's Yud K, Vav K. And what does Yud K, Vav K represent? The four worlds, essentially, right? The Yud is Atzilus, the Hey is Bria, the Vav is Yitzira, and the final Hey is Asiya. And as you go down the Seder Ishtalshlus from one higher world to the next, you lose a certain level of divine obviousness and revelation. So in the higher worlds, when you have the Yud, it's shining strong. This like represents the world of Atzilus. And the Hey, which is the receiver of that Yud, it's receiving from a very high place. It's receiving from a Yud, and therefore those two worlds, the Yud and the K, are considered basically the higher worlds. We call them Hanistaros Lashem Elokeinu. The hidden worlds are for God. There's full revelation in those higher worlds, which is essentially Atzilus and Bria, right? Or the Yud and the Hey. But the next thing that happens is the Vav. What does the Vav represent? A contraction. Right? Vav literally means and. It's like that which comes after. And how do you make a Vav? You make a Yud and you sort of draw it down, which means you're minimizing the godliness. The Vav is also symbolic of the Kav. What's the Kav? Right? That little beam of light that comes off of God, and it gets, if you've ever seen a description or a depiction of the Kav, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes down like a triangle, till it comes to basically an end, and the godliness gets disconnected. So the idea of going to the Vav means you're making a huge contraction. You're going from the hidden worlds to the revealed worlds, and all of a sudden there's an immediate loss of connection of godliness. And then what happens is, therefore, then the Hey, which is supposed to be the revelation of that Vav, just like the higher Hey was the revelation of the Yud, it reveals something which can have an experience of being totally disconnected. Right? In other words, the godliness gets so low that it produces a creation which feels independent, no longer godly. The Hey representing both Heys sort of representing like the revelation and the creations that are a result of either the Yud or the Vav. The creations that are a result of the Yud is the world of Bria. It's a creation by name, but it's a creation of total godliness. Whereas when you get down to the Vav, the Hey, which is supposed to bring out the creations of the Vav, that's a creation of this world, which experiences itself as independent. So this is the idea of the Yud K, Vav K scenario. And what he says in the future, the Vav K itself will become a Yud K. So instead of having Yud K, Vav K, what are we going to have? Yud K, Yud K. In other words, there's not going to be a Vav K anymore. Vav K is a thing of the past. And in the lower worlds, there's going to be the same dose of godliness that were in the higher worlds. And he's going to explain how this has to do with the connection between the third temple and the 15th of Av. Let's see how. First of all, there's an open verse which describes the state of the future as a Yud K, Yud K. Where does it say that? It says, Bayom Ahu Yihiyeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. How do you spell Yihiyeh? Yud K, Yud K. So it literally says, you wouldn't read it like that normally, but it's a very cool little limud that it says on that day, which is referring to the Messianic day, Yud K, Yud K. Hashem will be one and His name will be one.
Does this have anything to do with Teshuvah Ilah, or just a whole different thing?
Teshuvah Ilah? Everything has to do with Teshuvah Ilah. So it'll be, Yihiyeh is base Pamim Yud K. So on that day it will be Yud K, Yud K. What does that have to do with Tu B'Av and the temple? Kevan Sheyanikas Achitzonim Him B'chinas Vav K Zun. And this is because, or since, what we call the Yanika of the Chitzonim. Who can translate that? What does it mean, Yanika of the Chitzonim? These are some staple words. Hey, Pinchas. Yanikas HaChitzonim. The suckling of the external, that's the direct translation. And what it means is that when you minimize the divine light, it gives room for the bad guys to get their hands on it. For example, I think I remember this from my yeshiva days. Rabbi Goldberg gave this analogy. If you put like a fresh piece of meat out in the sun, so long as it's fresh, right, you're not going to see worms and bugs all over it, right? Because for some reason, like the strength of the life force keeps the bugs away. When there's a strong power of life, like you don't see necessarily a live animal, there's some bugs. But Chas v'Shalom, when you see the dead animal, it's just filled with maggots and bugs all over the place, right? Because when you minimize the life force, it gives room for the negative forces to suckle on. When their life force is too strong, is too much life and divine energy for the negative forces of the klippas to actually get enlivened from that. It negates them, it repels them. But when the life force gets minimized, like a vav, right, when you start to minimize the life force, then all of a sudden, all the negative creatures can come and they can basically gain existence from that life force. They can thrive from that life force because it's minimized enough for them to get their dirty hands on it.
Parasitize it.
What is it called?
Parasitize.
Parasites, right?
Parasitize.
Parasitize.
Yeah.
Is that a word? It is now. So the idea is that this yenikas hachitzonim, right, the ability for negative forces to be fed by the godly light can only happen when there's a tzimtzum and a minimization. And this starts in the Vav K dimension, because Yud K, it's full blast. There's no evil there. And this is also something we call Zun. What is Zun? Za and Nukva. You know these terms? You have to learn these terms, right? Another word for basically Yud K Vav K in the Zohar is we give these quadrants different names. The Yud is called Abba. The Hey is called Ima. The 6 spheros are called Za. What does Za stand for? It's an acronym. Zer Anpin, which is the little faces. And Nukva means feminine, right? What's that? Malchus, right? Or the final Hey. So where is there a Yenika of the Chitzonim? Where can the bad guys get their hands on this light? Only from the Vav K, which is called Zun. Zun is Za and Nukva. Zer Anpin and Nukva, which is the Vav and the Hey. Masha Ein Kim Bechinas Yud K. But when it comes to the level of the Yud K, which is also called in the Zohar what?
Din.
Abba and Ima, not Din. Opposite of Din, right? Full-blown revelation of godliness. The Yud K is called the Abba Isla. It's where the Chochmah and Bina in the Spheros, and this is where there's so much divine light that Iyav Shar Lios Yanika, that the negative forces cannot come out and take it. Just like we see, by the way, just in reality, when it's nighttime, it's more dangerous, right? Because the negative forces, they feel like empowered. There's enough light for them to get away with their mischief, but there's not enough light for them to be seen. And like when they're seen, they're afraid to go and be brazen like that in the middle of the daylight, right? That's like a special type of crook, right? A normal person, he needs to sneak around because the light has to be diminished. That's why it says all the creatures of the forest and everything comes out at night. It's when there's a diminishing of the godly revelation. Night and day on this earth is because there's a tzimtzum in the supernal worlds, which actually makes it get dark here, right? L'chein lasilavo, therefore in the future, shegam vav ke yihye kemo yud ke. So what do we see in the future? That the lower worlds will have as much light as the higher worlds, and therefore there will be no room, even in this lowly world, for the negative forces to take from the godly life force, because the vav ke will be turned to a yud ke. Lo yeshayich az churban begalus, and therefore it will no longer be relevant, the concept of destroying the base of Mikdash. It will no longer be relevant, banishing Jews from their land. No more Gush Katif, right? Because if the godly light is shining, Chas v'Shalom, not even an Israeli prime minister will have the guts to mamish raise their hand against the Jewish people. Chas v'Shalom. What's that?
That's what it means, Hashem Echad Shema.
Yes, on that day, Yud Ke. Right, so there's so much light will be shining that it will leave no room for the negative forces to do any negativity. So what is he saying here? What is Tu B'Av? It's not Tu B'Av, it's Yud K B'Av. It's Yud and He, right? So like I said, it's like this symbol in the sky on that day shining. It's shining in our lowly world. It's telling you that don't worry down there, Vav Ks. We're going to have a Yud K coming your way soon. And that's the idea of the Yud K of Av is a symbol of the divine revelation that the lowly worlds will also be shining at a level of Yud K, and therefore it's also the day of the revelation of the third Beis HaMikdash, which can't be destroyed. Because that is the day when godliness is so strong that it's impervious to suckling and destruction from the negative forces. So he's trying to explain, and I think he just has, the connection of Tu B'Av to the third Beis HaMikdash, right? With this idea that it's a Vav K experience. Excuse me, a Yud K experience. Umosav Ba'Maimer. This is for tomorrow, I think. We're out of time. Okay, Shkoyach, everyone. Please pass these back in.